We are watching developments from Jackson, Georgia tonight, where there is a delay in the execution of Troy Davis. The state of Georgia has delayed the execution, waiting for the Supreme Court to respond to a request for a stay of execution. NBC's Kristen Welker at the White House has just gotten a response from Press Secretary Jay Carney, who says, quote, "It is not appropriate for the President of the United States to weigh in on specific cases like this one, which is a state prosecution." We'll continue to watch that case. The President today delivered a strong, measured address to the United Nations General Assembly that trod carefully on the intransigency on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the 47-minute speech, the President declared that Palestinians must first make peace with Israel before statehood is a possibility, and reiterated his position that the US will oppose the effort by the Palestinian Authority to seek UN recognition of a Palestinian state.
Peace is hard work. Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. If it were that easy, it would have been accomplished by now. Ultimately, it is the Israelis and the Palestinians who must live side by side. Ultimately, it is the Israelis and the Palestinians, not us, who must reach agreement on the issues that divide them.
And here's how the Prime Minister of Israel scored President Obama's handling of the Palestinian attempt to secure UN-sanctioned statehood.
I think that standing your ground, taking this position of principle, which is also, I think, the right position to achieve peace, I think this is a badge of honor. And I want to thank you for wearing that badge of honor, and also to express my hope that others will follow your example, Mr. President.
The leading Republican presidential candidates disagreed with the Prime Minister of Israel on how the president handled Israel.
The Obama policy of moral equivalency, which gives equal standing to the grievances of Israelis and Palestinians, and including the orchestrators of terrorism, is a very dangerous insult.
The president should not be negotiating for his ally, Israel. The president should stand behind Israel. In part, the president's failure to stand by Israel at a time of need over the last couple of years has been very unfortunate for that part of the world.
So, despite the president's handling of the Palestinian situation receiving gushing praise from Israel's Prime Minister, whose opinion appears to matter most in the Republican mind, it was somehow not good enough for the Republican presidential candidates. Such attacks seem misplaced, considering that the president's support for the security of Israel's borders has been consistent with his Republican predecessor, and that he's demonstrated considerable talent in matters of foreign policy through leading successful missions to topple Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi and capture and kill Osama bin Laden, all without the loss of one American soldier's life or inciting a mass anti-American uprising among people in the region. This president, though, cannot catch a break on matters outside the US's border. And if that's not enough, within the confines of the White House as well. A new book from Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ron Suskind, entitled Confidence Men, alleges that President Obama presided over an administration that unfairly treated women serving in the White House and failed to properly respond to the economic crisis due to dissent amongst its economic staff, a failure to effectively carry out the president's orders, and a lack of decisiveness from the president himself. And joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is Ron Suskind, the author of Confidence Men, Wall Street, Washington, and the Education of a President. Good evening, sir.
Nice to be here.
The last time I saw such a host of individuals run for the hills was when the 12 disciples renounced Jesus with oaths and curses and ran away. Why do you think so many of your sources have come out and denounced your book as, frankly, an overheated set of falsifications?
Well, to the trained eye, I'm sure yours among others, most of those are what we call non-denial denials. This is what happens when a book like this comes out. When the curtain gets pulled back on an administration, really for the first time, many of the folks have a moment of what you'd call buyer's remorse. It's difficult. You try to bring sources up to the moment. Okay, the book's ready. I went went over the key quotes, of course, with them prior to publication. But when the lights come up and the heat, it's difficult. This is something that is being written about quite a bit right now. The Washington walk back, how it works. There are a few instances, one of Anita Dunn with one of the key quotes, which you probably want to mention here. It's a signature quote. Why don't you read it? You probably have it right in front of you.
Well, I'll come to that in a moment. But here's the interesting thing. Yeah. Many of these individuals who are now denouncing the book as a fabrication.
Well, no, they're not. If you really look at what they said.
I'll come to that in a moment.
No one is doing that.
In the book, well, you say nobody's doing that.
No, they're not.
In the book, you allege that the president was not prepared for the baptism of fire caused by the financial crisis.
Absolutely right.
And you say he was repeatedly undermined by his economic advisors. Who told you that?
All of the economic advisors extensively sat.
Did Larry Summers tell you that?
Summers, Geithner, Orszag, Christina Romer, all of them sat with me hour after hour for interviews.
Larry Summers says the hearsay attributed to me is a combination of fiction, distortion, and words taken out of context.
I think you're
Timothy Geithner says reports about this book bear no resemblance to the reality we lived.
All of their comments.
That's not a soft walk back.
No. Well, it is if you read the book. Because the fact is on Timothy Geithner, for one, he has extensive responses to everything in the book that is in the book. What we did is we had an interview prior to publication, 35 minutes. We went through letter and verse, and he has a very full explanation for what's in the book. He offers a denial, but not really a denial. If you read that, you'll find that
a combination of fiction, distortion, and words taken out of context.
That's after
Larry Summers.
Well, Larry Summers is another example. Larry and I talked many times. At the end of the day, Larry's speaking about a specific thing. You should be more specific.
I'll come to that. In the book, you allege that Larry Summers told Peter Orszag,
that's right,
then White House budget chief,
I'm not alleging it.
We're home alone.
That's right.
There's no adult in charge.
That's
Clinton
right.
would never have made these mistakes. Was it Peter Orszag who told you that?
Peter Orszag is quoted in the book. You should look at it, actually.
I have. Okay. So Peter Orszag told you that?
You bet. Peter Orszag is quoted saying that. Summers said it not just to Orszag. He said it to many people. It was called the Home Alone riff. Many folks heard it. When Peter heard it, for one, same with many of them, he was unsettled by it. You know, what is Larry saying? Is Larry right? And what's interesting is Orszag meditates on the Larry Summers Home Alone quote in a good page or 2 pages. Is Larry right or not? Yay or nay?
Is it possible that Mr. Orszag, who was hardly garlanded with praise when he left the White House, and he may have seen this as an opportunity to seek some kind of revenge?
No, not at all. You know,
why not?
Well, the fact is the Home Alone quote from Larry Summers comes from many people. Many people heard it. It was something that I talked to Larry about at the end of the day. I said, Larry, you need to listen to this. And he said, all right. I laid it out.
Isn't it interesting that Mr. Orszag is the one individual who has not walked back anything in the book? Mr. Orszag has been silent. He's the one individual who many people would suggest to you has a reason for saying these kinds of things because he may be seeking some kind of revenge.
Well, you're way off here. And the fact of the matter is that Orszag is one of many, many people. Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, Orszag, Romer, all the way through, and the president himself, who was presented the evidence reported in the book, did not deny it, went through explanations as the president does in our interview. More importantly, let's be clear here, is that when Larry was confronted with the Home Alone quote, at first he said, no, I didn't say it. I said, look, Larry, a lot of people heard you say it. I went through letter and verse of when they heard it. And then he said, all right, here I'll offer a response. It's in the book. He says, we were overwhelmed. There was a great deal going on, 5 times as many problems without 5 times as many people. You know, I think it's important to note that the quote itself is not what we're talking about. There are many examples, evidence throughout the book of episode and incident where the president wasn't aware what was happening. He was often surprised. Things were moving forward by virtue of the advisor's decisions without him being aware of it. So the quotes are the framing, but the actual disclosures are different.
Yes. Let's move on from the economic team to the issue of the president allowing what you describe as a potentially hostile, almost misogynistic atmosphere in the White House. You write, the president has a real woman problem, was the assessment of another high-ranking female official.
You bet.
The idea of a boys' club being just Larry and Rahm isn't fair. He, the president, was just as responsible himself. You believe that?
That's what the senior officials involved.
You're persuaded that Mr. Obama allowed a hostile environment?
The people most directly involved who spent their time in the White House, senior female officials, that is from their lips, as well as the quotes on the record about this issue. And mind you, it's important to note that the issue of the gender battles in the White House did get reported. It was reported in Jonathan Alter's book.
I read it.
Right, Mark Leibovich, Richard
Here's
Wolff
the point,
reported
though.
it as well.
They never quoted anyone saying they felt like a piece of meat.
Well, you know, these stories evolve, and these people...
They certainly do. Let me put to you what Christina Roma told the Washington Post. She cannot imagine ever having said this. Anita Dunn said, point blank, the White House was not a hostile environment.
Okay, let's talk about Anita Dunn, all right?
Please.
Okay, all right. Anita Dunn and I discussed this. The White House actually directed me to Anita Dunn, saying, look, we feel like the president has done an okay job with this. We're looking for moments where the president, in the book, where he exerted management authority. Anita and I talked a long, long interview in April of this year, and she went through letter and verse, not just from the administration, but from the campaign before, where there was a women's issue. When she got to the White House, she said it was much more pronounced. And what was fascinating is that in that interview and other interviews, I found that it was more pronounced and more pervasive than had been reported.
Why did you choose to be disingenuous in the way you presented that quote? Because what she actually said to you was that without the president, this would have been a hostile environment. Why did you choose not to include that clause?
Well, you want to know?
I do.
I mean, disingenuous, you're way off there. But and if you go off and go on the internet, you'll see all the stories showing exactly what happened with that.
Mr. Susskind, you're the author. We have you here.
You're really late on that part. That's already been essentially settled. But let me explain it to you. After the April interview, I called, before the book is published, I called Anita back, as I do with almost all the sources in the book, saying, here's what's going next to your name in the book. And we go through that.
You've made that abundantly clear.
We go through that letter and verse. We talked about that quote, other quotes, that one specifically, though. And I said, look, here's the quote, the longer quote. Of course, it's on the tape that the Washington Post heard exactly in Anita's voice and published a few days ago. That fuller tape, that fuller quote is out there. Well, we talked about the fuller quote. I said, all right, well, here's the fuller quote. You talked to Valerie Jarrett during the administration. You said if it wasn't for the president, this would be considered a hostile workplace legally defined for women, on and on. I said, okay, well, two things. Anita said, geez, could we not make that in present tense where I'm talking to Valerie? I'm saying it now. Let's make it in past tense because, frankly, Ron, I can't be saying that I saw a hostile legal workplace. 1 minute, let me finish. A hostile legal workplace with my husband being the general counsel to the president.
Indeed.
I said, all right. She said, look, I tell you this, though, in April of 2011, it is me looking back. So she said, okay. So I said, fine, looking back. Now, what about this thing about if it wasn't for the president? I said, Anita, it doesn't really make sense. What do you mean by that? You know, what, if there was a different president but there's still hostile workplace, you would feel differently about it? That doesn't make sense. She said, all right, well, I just want to say that means that we all were fascinated and we love the president. Just let me finish. I'm almost done. We'd walk across hot coals for this guy. I said, but Anita, that doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the quote. She says, that's right. I said, so what I'll do is I will lead into the quote with this feeling that the women, they were not displeased with the president. They love the man. And then we'll have, looking back, the rest of the quote. That'll be in the book, and that is what is in the book.
It's in the book.
Anita agreed with that, and that's why it's there.
Finally, because we don't have any more time.
Right.
Let's think for a moment about this.
This is old news, by the way.
Let's think for a moment about this president.
Yeah.
Here's a president who acknowledges with gratitude that his grandmother nurtured him.
Yeah.
Here's a president who appoints countless women to senior positions in the administration.
A murder's row of accomplished women.
And here's what he says in his book, The Audacity of Hope.
Yeah.
The opportunity for women to pursue careers, achieve economic independence and realize their talents on an equal footing with men has been one of the great achievements of modern life. Yeah. And you're saying that president allowed a hostile environment for women.
Well, you know, this president did allow it until he recognized that, wow, this is a problem. They confronted him at a dinner in November after months and months. He was very attentive to them. He said, look, I feel what you're feeling. I feel your pain. And ultimately, I think that helped. All the women felt a kind of relief to have brought their appeal to the president, and that was helpful. All in the book. The point is that the president largely did engage here, and he really did solve this problem largely when he recognized it, and that's what the book says. This book is about the evolution of this man to a president now, as he says in the final interview, is fully realized in ways he had not been before for the moment America is in now.
Ron Suskind, author of Confidence Men, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.